Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to the Staff and Trenchcoat. I be Pope Jupiter here with me co-host Raymond Magdalene.
Yeah.
We're reviewing The Ever King today by L.J. Andrews, book one of the Everseas, and there was no other way we could introduce this book.
So, who's gonna jump in first? I think we have the makings for an actual disagreement.
I think the affirmative goes first, right?
I don't think we have a rule, but
And
whatever. I loved the book. I think that it is probably the most interesting novel that we've read for the project, but possibly just the best all around, with the exception of the one with the necromancer,
Deathmaker.
I don't think it wasn't more fun to read than Deathmaker, but I do think it had some vectors that might have surpassed it. I The storyline itself I thought was really good, and the characters are varied and interesting, and we can get into the specifics on that. I thought the world that she made was intriguing, and there was some interesting. I'm a sucker for, two world style stories where there's some kind of a magical barrier between them. Essentially, that's kind of the way that I have my own universe set up for my book, and as I said, I'm just a sucker for that. My favorite book series ever is Roger Zelazny's Amber, and that also has sort of a interworld magical element to it. Overall, I enjoyed the romance elements. It has actual sex scenes, and I have opinions about those. But overall, I thought and the prose I thought was fantastic. There were some legitimate things that I highlighted this time where it wasn't because it was cheesy or not interesting or horribly written. I just highlighted them because I was like, oh, that's a beautiful phrase. The turn of phrase was pleasing at I don't know, I guess you would call it like an academic prose level. And then I thought the dialogue was mostly strong. We can discuss the dialogue surrounding the scenes of intimacy, but the general interplay between the different groups of characters, I there wasn't a single one of the moments where somebody said something and I had to remove the book for a moment from in front of me and just put my teeth together and cringe. And that has been the case for a lot of the books we've read recently. Dialogue is, I think, for urban fantasy, I think that's almost a genre defining feature, is that the dialogue is meant to be at the edge of cheese. And so if you're not a really good writer of dialogue and you're writing urban fantasy, the temptation to fall into over that line from where it's genre specific camp into this just sucks is really at a knife edge.
I
And
mentioned before Urban Fantasy's obsession with Joss Whedon Buffy speak.
right.
But yeah, a lot of those things I actually agree with. I think that the dialogue is good. The world building is pretty interesting. This is basically Pirates of the Caribbean crossed with Romeo and Juliet. Although the Romeo and Juliet,
It's a fairly strong, I wouldn't say it's 1-to-1,
no,
but you I would expect that maybe even a junior high student, you would probably see, if you ask them, like, think of some of a story that from other stuff that we've read that this story could be retelling. I think you would get answers of Romeo and Juliet, as I said, maybe from even like a junior high, which is not a knock.
no.
It is a pretty obvious. She had to have had that in her mind, if not directly, then strongly subconsciously.
I guess I would say this has the platonic characteristics of Romeo and Juliet, even if it's not, 1-to-1. It's kind of like if we look at Romeo and Juliet as like a story archetype.
Yes, it definitely fits into that.
Yeah.
Although it the interplay between there isn't enough of the other parts of the houses on display.
I think that was a major weakness, was that we kind of left the Earth Fae behind, and then we get, well, the last like 3 chapters where they're reintroduced.
Yes, and I would have liked to have seen more of the court of the Ever,
Mm-hmm.
the Council of Nobles or whatever, and more of that kind of intrigue. But that was not the story. She was not writing a political drama. But I would read for lack of a better phrase, I would read a Song of Ice and Fire level treatment inside this world. I think that could actually be really good. And I mean, the brutality is there, the violence. Some of the stuff that she described in this book, I think would probably not make George R.R. Martin blush, but he would dig it. He would dig the some of the creativity with how people are maimed and murdered.
Well, I think that would be his one criticism. Like, you almost killed a bunch of people. Why didn't you just go ahead and finish the job? Come on, you're right there.
Yeah, maybe he would. Well, but so far you've just agreed with me. You had strong feelings.
Yeah, and it's mostly just that the romance elements are fine, but they're overshadowed by the sexy elements. And I'm someone who regularly reads like smut and that kind of thing in certain situations, but it's not something I go looking for in books that I'm reading for intellectual pleasure, shall we say.
Okay.
I would read those kind of things for a different kind of pleasure that
Yes.
All
right, well, this might be a hard cut, but we had a little spill that had to be dealt with, and so we were talking about the sex scenes, and you were describing how they just weren't, they interrupted your flow.
I mean, kind of the dynamic of this is I listen to it, you read it for the most part. So I'm listening to this as I'm going about my day for the most part. Like, I don't just sit at home listening to books. I do it while like I'm working or driving somewhere or what have you. So I'm walking around work, grabbing parts or whatever, and I'm listening to this. I'm listening to someone. I'm listening to what amounts to softcore pornography, where if someone else were to hear this, and clearly I'm listening to it through an earbud, so it's not like I've got it on a speaker that anybody else can hear. But I'm listening to it in the earbud, and if someone else were to somehow hear this, I would be like, quit my job embarrassed. Like, because this is not something that you want to be, that would be acceptable to listen to at work. There's always that stereotype of the.
It is definitely NSFW.
Yeah, I mean, there's the stereotype of like the older woman reading the romance novels exactly like this in the break room at work, but that's almost always like a negative stereotype.
Yeah, I don't think you would get fired or anything for reading it at work, but if the audio was able to be heard by customers,
exactly,
then I could see it becoming a problem. Maybe it would only be you would be embarrassed and the manager or whoever.
Yeah, that's why I would say quit my job embarrassed.
Yeah, But I could definitely see them being like, hey, you need to, read something that's more appropriate.
Yeah.
If you're going to do audiobooks, or it could be the catalyst where you're not allowed to listen to audiobooks anymore.
Right.
Or whatever. I could totally see that.
But at the same time, it wasn't, and I'm not here to yuck anybody's yum. If this is what gets you off, this is what gets you off. But in 2024, this just seems like the most vanilla, basic sexual description. It was comical to me. I was laughing the entire time I was listening to the sex scenes. Like I'm walking around with this big grin on my face. Like I'm listening to the biggest joke ever. And it's this incredibly comical sex scene, which is supposed to be like passionate and sexy.
Yeah, they were earnest. There was no joke or No. She was definitely, the intention was to titillate.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so
she thought she was giving you a nice treat.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so I gotta be honest, the sex scenes ruined the whole book for me.
Oh, see, I couldn't disagree more. I enjoyed them. Um, I thought they were generally well executed. I have read other, and that maybe this dovetails us into genre, but I have read other books that were fantasy, high fantasy, epic fantasy that included these types of elements. And normally, when I've encountered that, it is clumsily written sex scenes surrounded by very mediocre fantasy storytelling and explicit skillet prose. And this was, I thought, an A plus story in terms of the writing quality, with B, B minus, uh, quote unquote smut elements. I just don't know if, again, it is vanilla. The sexuality is very straightforward.
Right.
And I just don't know. I don't think I could write those scenes better. I would just choose not to write them.
No, and I will say that there was a certain amount of skill displayed with those scenes. Like I'm not saying they were poorly written or anything like that. So my whole thing is that if you're gonna write porn. Don't half-ass it.
And you think this was still half
This is half-ass porn. If you can say cock but not pussy, it's not porn.
Okay, well, that I want to talk about that
Okay.
for sure. The choice of language. But let's save that for I'm slaving to the bullet list now.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
So let's talk about the genre first. As I said before we started recording, I definitely think this would fall into the at least the edge of what I would call epic fantasy. And I can't remember how they bill it on the store page, but that doesn't matter.
No.
I think it was a little dishonest to bill it as a pirate story. At the most, I would say this is a maritime story.
This is a pirate story in the same way Pirates of the Caribbean is a pirate story, in that it contains pirates, but they don't really do the thing pirates do.
Yeah, there was no real pirating.
No.
There's the one time where they have a ship to ship battle.
Yeah.
Well described, well written.
Yeah.
Particularly, this is a total side note, I guess, to this, but the scene where they're on the Evership and they're first going through the maelstrom, the barrier.
Yeah.
I felt like I could see that scene. It was cinematically, it was very well executed. And the ship is cool.
Yeah.
The concept of the seas crushing, and then there's the Evership is like this nebulous kind of a submarine
Yeah.
type thing.
It was unclear to me whether it was a property of the Evership or a property of the Sea Fae ships.
Because they can like go underwater, essentially.
Well, because
kind
the
of.
Evership was not the only vessel capable of crossing the canyon or whatever the divide was.
Yeah.
Which necessitates, as I understand it, going underwater. And so that would indicate to me that the underwater traversal is part of the whole Sea Fae magic voice thing.
Right.
But other than that, yes, there was quite a bit of magicalness about the Evership. It was kind of implied, if I remember correctly, that it had the bones or the souls of previous
Yeah, the
crew.
spikes. But I feel like it was closer to like a Navy situation. And the characters didn't really come off to me as pirates. Certainly they were vagabondish, but
It kind of struck me as someone who, this is the Fallout version of pirates. There's someone who grew up on or who came across contextless pictures of pirates and film strips
Yeah.
about pirates and that kind of thing. So they built this whole pirate society around like old Errol Flynn movies and
Yeah.
the Johnny Depp Pirates of the Caribbean movies
Well,
and that
because
kind
this
of
is
thing.
ultimately a story of empires.
Right.
It's not a story of sort of like people who are existing outside of the political and law
Yeah.
structure. And
I initially thought it was going to be Pirates of the Caribbean, but the pirates are an actual marginalized.
it would be like Pirates of the Caribbean, except there weren't any of the actual pirates in the films. It was just a story about the British Navy.
Right.
And so I was disappointed
Yeah.
because I was expecting much more actual pirate shit.
And
And
it's
there was.
possible that's in subsequent books,
Sure.
but and we definitely have pacing on the list here. This book spends a lot of time just spinning its wheels. I think
We'll get there.
we'll get there.
Absolutely. But so I would not call it a pirate story. I think it's sort of epic fantasy because you've got the multiple worlds and they are, even though it's kind of magic, you get the impression they're traveling great distances. There is world building. We know that this series is the outcropping of another series that she had already written. And so I would give it that pass, as it were. It definitely strikes me as high fantasy.
I
And
wouldn't even really call this an adventure story. Like it was,
no, I mean, it really is basically it's an imperial intrigue tale with a kidnapping. That's
yeah.
basically the story.
I mean, it's a romance ultimately. That's
Yeah.
what it is. Everything else is in support of the romance.
Yes.
The bond between Livia and Eric.
So just in the interest of just moving it along, because we want to get to the sex and romance elements discussion, how were you with the violence?
It seemed fine to me.
And in this particular part, when we say violence, we're talking about like combat scenes. There's a whole other discussion of violence that we'll discuss later in terms of as an element of the romance.
Right. But yeah, the violence, there were certainly some somewhat graphic descriptions, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Um, like I'm
There's
thinking,
torture.
yeah.
There's
There's off-screen mentions of a great deal of torture, and then uh,
there's at least one or two legitimate on-screen mutilations.
yeah, yeah. Things specifically of how Eric handled that the one assassin or not,
Snake eyes or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah, that was pretty intense.
and then crafting their bones into a
Yeah, this is kind of why I wanted to talk about the violence, because the one thing that was really weird to me was the main character Livia, the way that she reacted to the torture. She was just in.
yeah.
And it did not serve very well, I don't think, the kind of obvious binary that she was trying, the Beauty and the Beast.
Mm-hmm.
It would be like Beauty and the Beast, except she was just totally down for most of the evil shit that he was doing.
Yeah, and they kind of did this light in the darkness type thing, like they are each other's light in the darkness, but that means they have to be the dark. And it just seemed a really philosophical and
It was kind of was it Ouroboros
yeah,
quality to it, definitely. But I thought the scenes of violence were pretty intense. Maybe the most violent out of the books that we've read. There was some, definitely in the first book we read,
Knight Errant.
Knight Errant. There was more shock value.
That was more about
Violence.
violence against women, because
That happened a lot in there too,
this has more equal opportunity violence.
and it's very cerebral,
Yeah,
I would say, in a way that most of the other novels that we've read are not. And so that was another thing that I liked, was that she well executed the fantasy elements. There was plenty of battle and violence, and I thought there was a good mix when you set it against the romance scenes.
mm-hmm.
I mean, let's just get into it. So,
We've edged long enough.
yeah, we've edged long enough. There are some really cringy elements to the sex scenes for sure. But I want to talk first about the romance itself. There is so much that we could say here. I fear we're going to have to return to this a couple times as we get into our other topics. I thought about this a lot, how I wanted to say the sort of competing things that I think and feel about this. And so the caveat that I will give is I'm first going to discuss this as though I'm not thinking about the feminist elements. I'm not thinking about any social critique, just as a full, I'm all in. I'm not thinking about anything except what's printed on the page. The relationship that they have is interesting. There are elements of it that are engaging. I like the concept of the empathy based interaction that they have in the prologue and how she weaves that in throughout, and the pacing, not to be confused with the narrative pacing, but the pacing of of their relationship is interesting to me. All the elements are there. We do go from pretty much pure enmity all the way to what I would call like absolute Shakespearean dumbstruck. Yeah. What you would probably, maybe you would refer to as the author's intention at getting at, like true love with a capital T.
Yes.
And that was satisfying. And I think that the interactions that they have throughout the text are also interesting. And the way that the connection that they have begins to reveal more about both of them is, I think, a good mechanism.
Yes.
Now, I will take my head out of the sand and put on the hat that transforms me, it transports me rather back to the year 2424 of our Lord. And I say, brother in Christ, this is some of the most horrifically sexist and awful depictions of male-female romance that I think I've ever encountered. There's everything from Stockholm Syndrome to gas. The author tries to gaslight us through the character about abuse.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the whole mantle bond thing that literally the love of a good woman would save a bad king?
Yes, there's that going on.
Okay.
There's the taming of the beast.
Yeah.
But I mean, the whole story is predicated on this talisman of power.
Yes.
That was given to his father, and he lost it in combat. And then he has to wait a certain amount of years before he could reclaim it by defeating the current possessor of it.
Right.
I have never read a novel where a woman gets capital L literally objectified. I've never seen it before. She literally becomes a necklace of power for this man. I feel like we should contact it's Harvard or Yale or one of these Ivy Leagues. They have an online philosophy encyclopedia. And objectification could use this. It is the best example of it I have ever seen in almost 15 years of academic literary study. And I don't know how we can, as two approaching middle-aged white guys, have this discussion without it sort of being mansplaining feminism to a female author.
Right.
But in this case, I'm willing to take the risk because the war crimes are so egregious that I was fucking godsmacked. Obviously you have comments.
No, I agree. I guess I hadn't really thought about it. I think my brain honed in on it's a fucking enemies to lovers story, and I hate those. I think I went on record in
we blasted the 5th season.
Yes.
For going from like the forced breeding to affection,
right,
and all the abuse in there. That doesn't hold the candle to
no
this shit. That it's not even I feel like we almost have to issue an apology to N.K. Jameson, because I did not realize this. We're making some assumptions because it could be that this author is just the worst at this, and that it doesn't represent the norm. But it, by comparison, if Jameson came in and was like, "This is the state of things. I want to challenge that, but I still want to try and work inside of the genre." Actually, she
I
did it
mean,
because what she did was questionable. But I could see
it's
someone
it's
arguing
an
their way out of
evolution
it.
from here. Yeah, absolutely.
But it is tame by comparison to this. It's wild, and there is the whole story. He's physically assaulting her
Mhm.
all the time, and there's literally a paragraph where she says, "He doesn't hit me." That's one of her justifications for him as a character, and it's like, I mean, no, he didn't punch you in the face, but he's constantly, literally, doing sexual assault and using his teeth to cut her open and
Yeah.
choking her or roughly grabbing her or
Mhm.
literally tying her up. And then
Right.
and every scene they interact with, every time it is some kind of an invasion on her personal space and autonomy.
Right.
And the way that she just decides that she's in is wild. And then he does make her the Ever Queen, but there's also this element of like ownership
Mm-hmm.
that is consistent, and she
He
builds
does
it.
it. He does it by claiming her as his capital H.
And she lionizes it. It even becomes their like uh their personal erotic
Mm-hmm.
language to each other in the actual smut scenes.
Right.
Disgusting. Vulgar.
I mean, I've definitely seen the like in other smut, but it's not usually as loaded as it was with the surrounding context. That I'm yours, say you're mine, that kind of stuff happens all the time in smut. That's real common. Not defending it in this case. But yeah, it was, and normally I like these kind of magical bond type stories, even if they can get a little, rapey and what have you.
But the
But
way that she tries to make the arc of the Ever Kingdom this thing where she feminizes it, or where she
yeah,
comes in and like makes it a less sexist society. By the time she got to that part, I'm sitting there, I'm just thinking like, how dare you? Who the fuck do you think? Like, really? That's like I can't even think of an analogy. It is so unearned by the undertones of propping up sexist stereotypes. It is so couched
it'd
in
be
that.
like a slave owner coming to America in 1850 and complaining about our slavery.
You're right.
I mean,
I
it's
mean, that was where my brain went, but I just wasn't sure how to articulate it in a way that captures the magnitude
yeah,
of all of it. And what's the? I always forget the name of it. What is that test?
the Bechtel
The
test.
Bechdel test. I think it fails it.
I think so. I'm pretty sure the only conversations between Livia, between any two females, are about a dude. I'm
Every time.
Yeah, or I think the other part of the Bechtel test is that it advances the plot, and none of the discussions really advance the plot.
No, certainly not. I mean, a couple times they're discussing Eric,
Right.
but other than that, and it blew me away. I just can't say enough about how troubling the relationship that they have is, and maybe this is kind of where we can bring in the book talk drama that we saw the other day.
I feel like this book was written to tick every box of the hashtag problematic book talkers. Enemies to lovers. Spicy. Has
Is that a thing? Enemies to lovers?
yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Um the way that, like, this is the kind of thing I would expect the cover of this to have Fabio on it. The
Okay.
cover of this book needs Fabio on it.
Yes.
That is the kind of book this is. I assume if you're listening to this, you're at least somewhat plugged into the wider book talk, book Twitter, whatever. There's currently in mid 2024 a war raging between people who call books like this porn and people who think it's, fine, read what you want. And I generally fall on the latter camp. Read what you want. But this shit is so bad. It
But it's not feminists who are on Book Talk against books like this. It's
No.
white dudes that are mad.
yeah, it's
Judeo-Christian undertone
white dudes or
screeds about
white
how
women.
it very much, the stuff that I saw sounded a lot like gamers getting mad when they do something in a game and they're like, keep the politics out of my games.
Yeah,
Except in this case, it's keep the sex out of my fantasy books.
right.
And well, and I guess this actually transcends the fantasy genre. This is just a general issue in that space, as far as I understand it, with very limited research, very cursory.
Right.
But this book deserves to be attacked viciously by academic feminists who have better credentials than I do.
And it feels kind of shallow to attack it for the sex scenes because ultimately, like I said,
We don't need those to attack the book, although they help.
Yeah, they certainly don't remove ammunition.
It does seem like she goes to fairly great lengths for there to be consent for actual sex,
Right.
penetration. But otherwise, she dispenses with it entirely. And by the time it happens, I am not able to believe that the main character would be in a mental state where she could grant consent.
Yeah.
So this is a rape story.
Right.
As far as and a breeder story. And it's explicit in the text that his culture is set up so that women just function as incubators of their heirs.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what happens to the main character. The consent is, I think, a huge issue throughout the text. The way that she tries to make it seem like it's okay at the end and kind of turn it into this is a story about trying to convince her dad to marry her off type thing is, I thought, kind of offensive. It doesn't even have to be abstract. It's just, if you are reading this and you think this is the way that actual romantic love should function, then you are being done a disservice by the undertones of this text.
And also, you'll graduate high school someday.
Maybe. If you don't end up in juvie.
True.
I mean, the main character spends the first half of the book explicitly threatening her with gangbang rape.
Yes.
And constantly locking her up and then making every situation such that even though she hates him, he is the only way that she can feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the mechanism by which he manipulates her into loving him back. So that by the end of the book, when she, with scare quotes, consents to his full penetration, in my mind, that is still overtly rape.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that it's definite. I mean, we already mentioned Stockholm Syndrome. Plus the way that I really, really dislike the way it was done at the end because the way that he kind of implied that her family did the torture, only to find out at the end that no, it was a different family of Earth Fae, and actually her family rescued him. It just felt so manipulative and, from a certain point of view type shit that it's just like, how do you trust this man? How do you build a life or relationship with him when he basically lied to you about something like that?
And you were the one who first brought this up, but this definitely falls into the category very often of the main character is withholding information but
Uh-huh.
it's not information that would have made much of a difference if he had just shared it with her at the beginning.
Right.
And he frames it like, well, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have mattered because ultimately the narrative is not really about their romance. It is more about the conflict over his crown.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the story ends. Spoilers incoming. The story is ultimately about the lineage of the Ever Kingdom
Mm-hmm.
and the war between the Sea Fae and the Earth Fae, and the small details that of his capture and whatever are interesting to the development of the backstory. But if he had told her at the very beginning, the only thing that would have changed would have been her disposition.
Right.
It wouldn't have affected any of the narrative points.
No.
And so it's literally just a gaslighting tactic. Another part of, point blank, the novel as written seems to idolize, valorize, prop up, endorse physical and emotional abuse, rape, and basically the worst version of patriarchal sexism that you can construct.
Yeah.
I mean, what's her face? I'm blanking on the name of the
Celine?
no, the author that wrote The Handmaid's Tale. In any event, she would have a heyday with this, and I think Ursula Le Guin would also raise at least one eyebrow and condemn what's going on here for sure. And it was very striking. And then the question that I have is, surely this is aimed at a female audience.
Right. That would be my assumption.
And are women consuming this and just being like, oh yeah,
Let's look at the reviews.
this is the good shit. Yeah, fire up the reviews.
Very good story from Symphony.
Okay.
Took them forever to get together, although it totally had me going for a bit, lol. From Margaret Samora. Fabulous dark fantasy romance. L.J. Andrews absolutely knocked this out of the park, and the narration, absolutely amazing. I loved all of the accents. It made it feel so real. I love Livia and Eric, our morally gray love interests. Faye meets pirates.
I'm going to stop you right there. It's not morally gray.
No.
There's this is not a thing where you have to really sit there and think about it. And if the idea was that she wanted to titillate you by it being morally questionable, then that was not done well.
No.
Because it doesn't achieve that. It is stark. It is obvious. It is not a nuanced exploration and interrogation of the idea of how should love be formed and how should men and women interact. How could you do it? If the thought experiment was, how could I write a romance that kind of takes the king wants to marry a princess from another realm archetype and play with the intergender norms and schemas and make something. It's not doing that. It's just doing like a full overt abuse and sexism turns to love narrative.
Yeah. So, would you say that they come down on the side of morally white or morally black? Because
Like meaning good or evil?
yeah.
Evil.
Okay.
I don't even think it's not difficult at all.
Okay.
Like
I was hoping we were agreeing with that because I wanted to read this next review. This is a 3-star review, by the way. Started off good. This was just okay to me. The narrator wasn't my favorite, and maybe that was part of it. I just find I don't like stories where the hero is painted as a morally gray character, but then isn't really at all. Like they turn into a complete cinnamon roll in all aspects, and it's just not realistic.
I haven't ever heard the phrase a cinnamon roll.
Oh, you haven't?
I haven't heard that before.
Yeah.
I like that.
A cinnamon roll is just a complete softy sweetie pie,
Oh, okay. I was thinking more of like the shape of the cinnamon roll and how it's kind of wrapped up and becomes slightly homogenous.
No, a cinnamon roll is someone who's just a sweet, nice person. is probably the only real cinnamon roll in the whole fucking story. 'Cause it's just
was that the pronunciation in the audiobook?
I guess
I in my brain it
the
was
cook.
Sewell.
Okay, the cook, the
Yes,
guy who
loved that character.
love him to death, and he is a classic cinnamon roll, and he's amazing.
Very very well done. And I would also say that in a vacuum, I think she did a really good job of the portrayal of disability with that character.
Yeah,
It was interesting.
and I will say that is one aspect of Pirates that I think she got right, is that pirates were not people who discriminated against people based on their disabilities. If you're willing, they'd make it work. I mean, there's a reason why eye patch and a peg leg is such a common shorthand for pirate. That and a hook hand.
Yeah, and there's the the code of thieves or whatever that kind of unites them, and there's the camaraderie and the
Mm-hmm.
if you it particularly since they knew that Sewell had been at one time pulled his weight, was
Yeah.
willing, he got knocked the fuck out,
Right.
and I like how they take care of him, and I liked the reveal that he was the father of Celine
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. But so returning to that review, I do wonder, were they craving just more abuse? Like he didn't want them to, or she, whoever the reviewer was, they, them, whatever. Were they wanting him to continue with the threats and the physical abuse?
Yeah, I think they wanted them. I don't know what they wanted because there's like, are you truly morally gray? Are you a cinnamon roll? And then for all that, they're like, with 2 hours left, I found myself amping up the speed to get through it quicker. Like, I mean, granted, if we weren't reading this for this project, I probably wouldn't have finished this book. Whether I would have started it at all is another question. Yeah, I don't know how you can. I guess if you were a complete dunce with regards to like feminism and abuse tactics, then you could see him as a cinnamon roll because like, well, yeah, he threatens to throw her to his crew, but like that's just his hard exterior, and underneath is this gooey center cinnamon roll, and he wouldn't really do that, and it's like, well, at that point, I think he would have. I definitely think he would have. And I'm not so convinced, like, that he wouldn't throw another woman to his crew. He's obviously not going to throw Livia for various reasons by the end of the book, but it doesn't seem like Livia really did anything to curb the brutality of the.
No.
the
And he just, like I said, 10 out of 10 on for the author in terms of cramming as much sexism into one narrative as possible. Because you even get the classic abusive boyfriend thing where he steals her, physically and emotionally abuses her, takes her to where she is isolated from her family,
mm-hmm.
throws her in a room and locks her in there, but then, but he gets her some paints.
Some special paints made for her that they
will treat. And so, he's not all bad.
Actually, sidebar about the paints. Did those come out of left field for you too, or was there some scene earlier in the book?
No, it's like with fascists where the cruelty is the point, like the sexism is the point. Like,
well, no. So I don't remember any scene about her painting on glass or anything.
Oh no, that's a big part of the beginning of the story.
Okay, I must have.
She paints all the windows, and it's important to her people. And then when he kidnaps her, a bunch of them are broken, and so on and so forth. And he knows that she paints.
Okay.
And so this is a moment where, it's like, as I said, the classic, you're in a relationship and the guy beats you up and screams at you and won't let you see your family, so on and so forth. But, like once in a while you come home and like he bought you chocolates.
Yeah.
And that's enough. That's enough for the in this case, the woman to have a completely altered ability to contextualize the abuse, because that's the moral gray.
He beat the shit out of me, but then he went to Jared, so it's all cool.
Yeah.
Like, no, girl, find someone who gets you Jared and not beat the shit out of you. Unless you like getting the shit beat out of you, in which case, just use a safe word.
Yeah, it was so problematic that this is another one where I wish that we had a large enough audience and enough power to
To
get
talk to
on to
her.
the author, because I would just love to hear the way that she would rationalize writing
There's
it.
there's like an 80% shot she's some like shitty second wave turf, right?
I'm sure.
Like,
I got big conservative vibes,
oh yeah.
obviously. Uh, no doubt.
I mean that could be the. I feel like you could do this kind of story in a feminist way, especially with, and I'm sure we'll get into this either in world building and pacing. The way the relationship between Earth Fae and Sea Fae does not seem to jive with the story. But I feel like you could do this story in a feminist way without changing too many elements. The kidnapping would probably have to be one of them that changes, but I don't know.
What about the physical abuse?
Well, I said not too many elements.
Okay.
No, but I meant more the way that she tries to kind of, like you said, feminize the Earth King, the Earth Sea, or the Ever Sea.
Yeah, I don't know if that's I'm not happy with that as a term. It was just the closest thing I could come up with to what I was feeling.
Debrutalize. I assume what you mean by it is actually more like make it less brutal, more
Well, yeah, because
empathetic.
the idea is that he makes her his equal by his choice, and it's going to reverberate
Mm-hmm.
through the society, and the other noble women are going to assert their, standing beside their husbands instead of as explicit and literal breeding stock.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not enough. That element is only useful if it's not couched within all of this other propping up of abusive elements of a relationship. I mean, I guess now would be as good a time as any. Let me pull up the good old quotes. I did like the phrase, "The Ever King could lick my damn ass if he thought I would stay unarmed a moment longer."
Uh-huh.
Okay. Yeah, this is the Bloodsinger said he wanted to draw out my torment, but the man had hardly raised a hand to me, let alone a blade. So this is the moment where she's saying, yeah, he does, kind of physically abuse
I mean,
me.
he barely hits me. What's the big deal?
It's not a big deal because really he just wants to protect me. And that's a huge element of the romance narrative is I think the author wants us to think that he just does things that are on the edge. He's edgy. He's not abusive. He's always restraining himself
Uh-huh.
because he can't come to terms with the feelings that he has because he thinks he's a monster. And so he doesn't want to show himself to her, and so he just plays
Yeah.
at being an abusive psychopath because he just can't yet bring himself to embrace the true emotions that he has.
Right.
And he needs her gentle, soft touch to unlock those parts of him so that he can dispense with these illusions at being an asshole and become the true bastion of honor.
Mm-hmm.
And that is disgusting.
Yeah.
Shame on you. Shame on you for this. It's grotesque.
Yeah.
And for our potentially as many as one or two female listeners, don't let them roll on you like this. That is not the way that people should behave.
If you're in a relationship like this, get the fuck out.
Yep, time to go.
If any of this rings a bell, run.
And definitely don't let homeboy raw dog you.
No.
Avoid.
If he tells you he had a vasectomy, double check.
And here's another one. And this is sort of like after I think they've had at least one of the more graphic sexual interactions. Yet I couldn't keep my mind from spinning to the gentle way he'd returned me to the bed. The way he'd rushed me out of sight before anyone saw me unravel. The way he stopped. A man who had utter control over me in a vulnerable moment had stopped it. And so again, the virtue of Bloodsinger, of Eric, is that this is the best she can come up with, is this attempt at beautiful prose where she's saying, but he didn't actually rape me.
Right.
And he didn't do it in front of his buddies.
Yeah.
What a sweetheart. What a man worthy of love.
What a man worthy of song and tale through time.
Yeah, here it is again. The Everking took a woman from her home, a cruel, vindictive act, yet he'd never put a hand on me. False.
Yeah.
And again, unless the author is trying to get you to believe that physical assault has to be like striking you in the face or hitting you with a weapon of some kind.
Right.
But I mean, he's constantly choking her.
Yeah.
He's constantly grabbing her in ways that are inappropriate.
Hauling her around.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, to me, that's problematic because I would say in my experience of, and obviously this is anecdotal, but of the women that I have known, the number of men who actually just haul off and full punch you in the face is much smaller than the number of men who do the things that Eric does.
Right.
And the progression of trying to normalize opposing physical assault in relationships includes many of the things that Eric does in this book that she, in paragraphs like this, explicitly tells the reader that is not assault,
right?
That's not abuse, and that's as close to like just like being an evil writer as you can get without just, I think to be more evil than this as a writer, you would be hard pressed to not have to leave fiction and get into actual just like evil political pamphlet type things,
right.
and just nonfiction things generally. But in terms of how to write a narrative that does a thing that is just morally wrong, this is definitely as close as we've gotten with any of the novels that we've read for this project.
Yeah.
Oh, and then Eric had a woman on his crew, and not merely as a common crew member. Clearly, Celine was part of his inner circle. And so there we have her, again, justifying the things that Eric does by saying, he has a black friend,
Yeah.
What the fuck?
And we come to find out this is a woman who is basically dependent on him to stay alive, because if her true identity comes out, the entire world will want to kill her. So it's like, how much is she going to excuse to keep her life?
Hot white ropes spilled onto her fingers when the relief claimed me from the back of my skull to the pit of my gut.
Now imagine hearing that in that voice I played for you earlier.
I do think the audible did you dirty with, because I would have laughed a great deal as well. But I was surprised, and now it's as good a time as any, to discuss the discussions of the male anatomy are very graphic. And then
white ropes.
Yes, I did not expect, even in the context of what had come before that, I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
And then I mean, she just goes full triple X and fucking like cat style cleans her hand off. It's wild.
Yeah.
But then the descriptions of the female form are right on the edge of like Victorian.
Yeah.
My hot center.
I believe they actually refer to them as nipples pebbling, but I think that's about as raunchy as it got.
Yeah. I banned for him my sex. And it's really weird because it is kind of like, and then the Southern Belle took off one button from her dress. Yeah, and then he bukkakied all over her face. His cum was everywhere. I couldn't believe it. Oh, look at his fucking chode. And it's really weird.
I think you've honed in on, like I said, I was laughing through every sex scene. Just
It's the juxtaposition is fucking wild.
yeah, and there were a couple of times where like you want to say pre-cum here, but you're too conservative to do it. So you just talk about like stickiness or release or something. And then she says fucking white ropes and it's
Yeah.
like what the fuck?
It was really wild. And here, this is maybe the worst paragraph in the whole book. The feel of him marking me from the inside out
Yes.
was a
Oh,
rush of pleasure, of affection, of love, of which I'd never tire.
ugh. I think this might actually ruin smut for me because like it just is recontextualizing a bunch of stock lines and
I
stuff.
could totally see the author doing a TikTok or a YouTube short talking about unironically chemical like
Uh-huh.
bond pairing
Oh yeah.
and so on and so forth.
It doesn't take long to find incels talking about how women bond with the first guy they sleep with.
Yes,
So if you sleep around, then you lose the ability to form bond, and you're like a chewed up piece of gum.
it very much felt like an endorsement of that
Yeah,
type of song.
especially since she was a virgin before that. Like, it was pretty clear that the rest of her friends got down. And I think it was implied that one of them was a little slutty.
Well, and that's and again to this is another layer of analysis that maybe goes a little bit more hootie snooter than is necessary for our podcast, but there is the narrative. It's sort of like an inverse of the Bildungsroman. Are you familiar with that term? The coming of age male
Mhm.
story. All right, well, dispense with that then. It's this kind of sojourn from her homeland because there is too much liberal freedom in her homeland. She has to leave to go and find a
Okay.
place where her conservative beliefs can actually matter because
Right.
there was no one for her to give herself to in the land of debauchery where everyone sleeps around and can't bond pair, so on and so forth.
Right.
She has to be saved to the conservative sea pirate
Mm-hmm.
world where the trad wife reigns supreme,
Yes.
and she makes slight modifications to that, but ultimately she she doesn't become a full person
Mm-hmm.
until she is bonded with her conservative
And
partner
marked.
and marked and claimed, and she has to valorize that role. This is the novel equivalent of a TikTok where it's the trad wife showing you how she bakes the bread every morning in her
Mm-hmm.
kitchen, but she has the hostage video face the entire time. And
But she's got really deep cleavage and big fucking tits
yes,
because
yeah,
got to titillate
and,
somehow.
and I mean you could just go for ages down that rabbit hole
Yeah.
with this novel.
It is surprising to me with everything you've said that you said it was your favorite book of the ones we've done thus far. Was that simply because of how much you have to say about it, or do you think it was actually
That's a lot of it.
okay?
That's a lot of it. I feel like this was the most ripe for social commentary
Right.
because it we've asked this, or I've asked this about other novels that we've done, and I'll say something to the effect of, do you think the author was actually trying to make a social critique here?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in this case that's a hard yes.
Yeah.
This is an ideological piece that appears to have been written from a hyper conservative
Yeah.
position. We haven't done any uh, research on the author's political beliefs or anything like that, but if this is like a far lefty that wrote this by accident, then uh, some kind of therapy is necessary, and or
Or you just need to accept that you're a sub. And you need to find a good dom. Do your research first,
no,
please.
I can't do my folks that like being a sub or being domed. I can't do them like that because that can be healthy and appropriate.
That's what I'm saying. I think that a big part of the whole romance genre, this kind of thing, is women who I don't want to say women who are natural subs, because that gets too much into the women are naturally submissive and all that stuff.
which we don't advocate for on the
No.
Staff and Trench Coat.
No, absolutely not. Um, but people who are, if they could like look into a magic mirror and say, these are the things you're into, stop running from them,
Yes.
that they would find out, oh, I actually like being dominated in a consensual, safe way.
Consensual with scare quotes, X3.
Well, consensual non-consent, you know.
There is no consent in this book.
No, not in this book, not at all. But if you're not familiar with kink scenes, consensual non-consent, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I just to keep myself pure and clean, I feel like I have to just keep saying that
I 1000% agree. There is not consent in this book.
we need somebody who has a degree in gender studies, or even just a female scholar who did I might have hit the mic there, or a female scholar who did their undergrad with a focus on feminism, would be able to just come in here and just bam, 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 just like knock this thing down.
Yeah.
I just don't. My undergrad was African American literature, so I mean, I had encountered some feminist texts, but we are probably missing
Yeah,
a
and
lot.
to be clear, my undergrad was magic and weed, so
Got him.
you know, neither of us are prepared for a gender study discussion of any academical depth. But
Yeah, in a couple years, I should have the opportunity to teach a class on fantasy literature, and when I do that, I'm going to put this book on the reading list. It maybe even just an excerpt, because I just want to see what a 19 to 22-year-old, preferably, I'd like to get multiple perspectives, obviously, but I'm just interested in the feminism-minded English students, when they're in the game, reading the stuff, what they would have to say about this. And my guess is that even our take is going to be too soft on the author.
yeah, I do wonder how well the university would care about you putting a smut book like this on the syllabus, but it may not matter once you get to the college level. I don't know.
I have never encountered a story with this graphic of sex scenes as a required reading, but again, I could excerpt,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean that will be a concern, because of course I won't be tenured,
Right.
and so I won't have complete freedom. But to kind of put a bow on it, the relationship between the main characters, the romance, the arc there is fucking insane and makes no sense unless you begin to wonder what kind of political leaning does the author have, and
Right.
what are they actually trying to prop up here. And
Anyone who wants to hide behind the bond, then the bond is mental coercion and is not better than Rohypnol or GHB.
yeah, and then again, then it's magic rape,
Yeah.
and made even worse by the fact that she makes it out to be that it's kind of the witches who are propagating it in that sense.
Right.
It's the magic of the conservative Everqueen, or the conservative Eversea sirens and witches, that create the magic that forces this conservative woman who is just trapped in a world of too much liberalism to bond with the conservative super king and realize her true trad wife potential.
Mm-hmm.
There are these moments where Eric defends her from attackers or the comments, etc., of his people, and she absolutely worships Eric in those scenarios.
Yeah, the scene where he literally takes a sword for her near the last third of the book or so. and it's like a nearly mortal wound until she discovers she can channel his sea voice or his power.
No, she can amplify the healing herbs.
Oh, but didn't she also give him her blood?
Yeah,
And
there
then
was.
he sang.
Yeah,
Yeah, I guess we're moving into the magic system
let's
discussion.
do it.
Um, there seemed to be a there were at least two different magic names for magic systems, and then there's whatever the fuck the sea witches are doing.
Yes, they are your archetypical
Sorcerer
sorcerer
wizards.
wizard. It seems like they do spell casting,
Yeah.
and they also fit into the, well, I guess you would call like the femme fatale uh,
Yeah,
archetype, which I'm not a fan of.
there seemed to be something about trying to indicate she was this matriarch, but she was a completely toothless and powerless matriarch. So because she made the I forget her name. She was the grandmother of the Everkin of Eric,
Yes,
and the leader of the Sea Witch bloodline.
the House of Mists.
Yes, House of Mists. And she gave Torvald, that was his father, right?
Yep,
Gave Torvald the mantle
the placebo mantle.
and told him that it would grant him greater power. I forget what she actually said, but it was like greater power than any Ever King has ever had, or something
Yes,
like that.
but it doesn't actually do anything. What matters is that you have to become pair bonded
Right.
and become an exemplar of the traditional Judeo-Christian nuclear family marriage archetype.
Mm-hmm.
And once you achieve that, then the world bends to your magical will. It's yucky.
Yeah.
It's very yucky. As we're having this discussion, I'm liking the book less. as I'm forced to piece this out. And
Didn't we have this with For Love of Magic, where I came in liking it?
I
You
I
know,
think
in a kind of.
I think you came to neutral. In this case, I'm flip flopping because
Well, I think I came in neutral to liking it and left hating it.
okay,
And
then
you,
that's kind of what's happening here. Yes,
yeah,
and when I finished it, I did immediately get the second volume,
okay,
and I got through the prologue and quickly realized I don't actually want to read this. And so I put it down. I probably won't read it. And as you said a little bit ago, had I not needed to read it for this project, I don't know if I would have finished it. But
yeah,
I don't think the outside of the obligation, I wasn't interested enough to continue.
right.
What were we talking about?
The magic system.
The magic system. So you have the inborn house based magic where it seems like, at least on the, I guess on both sides, there's some general gradient where your magic is going to fall based on which family you're a part of, but then each
Right.
person has an individual expression within the suite of possibilities, the category, the bucket
Yeah.
of powers associated with your house. And that's okay. I like that. And I thought
It's a little genetic lottery magic, but
yeah,
you know, there does seem to be, at least on the Sea Fae. I don't know if maybe I missed them going into it more in depth on the Earth Fae side. With the Sea Fae, it seemed like you could change your voice.
it seemed like there was some of that at least.
Yeah.
I don't know if they bring any of that up with the Earth side. And
I'm betting that the second book is going to explore more about the Earth side, but obviously neither of us are going to read that. So,
yeah, and I thought it was pretty well executed for as far as your true, just like as you said, genetic lottery magic
hmm,
systems go. Pretty cool. And then there was the wonder based magic of the sirens. And was that the only two interlocking systems there, or was there a third type of magic at play.
Not that I know of.
Because then there was the sea itself with the barrier and all of that, which it was a little bit unclear how that had formed, or if that's just kind of a natural.
I don't. I think that might have been part of like the Ever King's power, maybe.
Okay.
Because it kind of seemed to indicate that Eric was actually the one who sealed off the way between the worlds. Um.
And I'll be honest, the reveals about the history made Eric's character less believable.
Uh-huh.
Because a lot of it kind of seemed, I mean, he knew all along who had tortured him. And like his dad was a giant dick. And so I wasn't able to buy that he would get like I have to avenge him. And I get it. He wanted to be viewed as powerful by his people. And fine, I get that she was constructing a psychological profile for the character.
Yeah,
But
she tried to make it that he was like abused into that mindset by his uncle.
yeah. Well, but then there was the whole thing where like his deepest secret is that he killed his mom. But then when the actual reveal, it went too far in the direction of like it was clearly the dad being a monster.
Yeah.
Not that he was like this calloused murderer. He didn't like want to kill his
No.
mom.
And it definitely rings of someone who is incapable of internal change, even though I would expect someone with his personality and his attitude that as soon as his uncle died and he lost those influences, he would try to change as much as he could. But of course that doesn't have this tameable beast that Livia can come in and sand off the rough edges or whatever.
Right.
So, and I think that's exactly it. She tried to make him this. I definitely think on the cinnamon roll to
Pufferfish.
sure, we'll call Pufferfish the asshole end of that spectrum. He's definitely closer to the cinnamon roll side, but he's definitely got like that Pufferfish exterior.
Right. Well, and that's a huge, the taming of the beast, the cracking of the shell, so on and so forth, is a
Right.
huge part of the story. It's just couched within this horrific bolstering up of exploitation and trad values that is rather ugly.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some straight up J.K. Rowling type shit going on social media and whatever.
Right.
I mean, like we had some problems with, I think it was Magic Bites, with her, the way that she portrayed some stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
you go to her website and it's clearly, she has a whole paragraph about how she wants everyone to feel safe and.
Oh, you're conflating Deathmaker.
Oh,
Deathmaker. Yeah, she had the trigger warning at the beginning, and I want this to be a safe space for everyone who comes.
There are no trigger warnings on this one.
No.
She doesn't give a fuck.
No, in fact, she probably wants people to be offended, like the snowflakes they are.
Exactly. Listen up, liberal. Okay.
Listen up, liberal. My husband left me.
Yeah. My husband left me. So pacing. I hate when the first book in a series does a cliffhanger at the end where it's a thing that should have been resolved in the text.
Yeah.
If you're going to do a cliffhanger like that, it should be one of the most common ways you see it done is the new, more powerful enemy shows up.
Right.
Is that cliche? Yes. But it doesn't close the book at the expense of me being pissed off that we were owed the discussion between Eric and Livia's father.
Mm-hmm.
That was a part of the story that should have been included.
Right.
And now I think she's going to drag that shit out through a whole nother novel.
You think it's going to be the end point of the second book?
Yes. I'm not sure about that, but the tagline for the next book is like, will he save her in time?
Oh, God. They spent an entire book playing Will They, Won't They, building up this fucking edging crescendo for 45 fucking chapters.
Well, I mean, at least on the sex side, like there's no like she gives us all of that. Like we're dropping ropes and shit.
Right, yeah. So at least we got the climax. But if she's gonna separate them for an entire book like that,
And I mean, who knows? Maybe she could resolve that in a couple chapters. I didn't read it, but
right?
that was the impression that I got. And so,
And I mean, it could be that he gets to her like in the first act, whatever, and then the rest of it is like her in a coma or something.
right, or it gets to the part of the story where the father still wants to kill him and save her, and then she has to convince her father that, no, daddy, I love him.
Yeah,
That's coming.
right. So I felt like to keep going on pacing, I have no idea how long it passed between her first kidnapping and her second kidnapping. You know, the kidnapping where Eric takes her and then the end of the book.
This felt like weeks.
Yeah.
I feel like the novel took place over like a month or two.
That seems right. That also doesn't seem like nearly enough time for
Not for like a healthy change from, an actual morally gray situation into, true love. But I mean,
right.
it's definitely enough time for horrific physical and mental abuse to result in behavior changes.
Absolutely. Especially when you've got someone like Celine who's basically, your safe the safety from the safety.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far into the Handmaid's Tale, comparisons, but it very much seemed like she was the indoctrinated sort of, what do they call them? The Marthas, I think is the term they use, but sort of like a more high ranking handmaid that kind of knows how to, here's how you make it through this Christo-fascist, dystopia, and keep your head on your shoulders character. And so Celine is a character that I liked her.
Yeah.
I thought she was well written, but again, her function in the story is odious.
Mm-hmm.
The pacing of the narrative events, the Empire stuff, I think was a little bit fast.
Mm-hmm.
But the bulk of the novel is basically the same scene playing out over and over between Eric and Livia.
Mm-hmm.
Of he is abusive, but she sees the good in him.
But he's less abusive than what he's protecting her from.
Yes.
In case you couldn't hear it, massive scare quotes on that.
Lots of scare quotes with this novel.
Yes.
A bonanza of scare quotes. And then we've kind of talked about it, but I guess our last bullet point is the world building.
I feel like it has been more than 20 years since there was a fucking war. Unless these people only live like 10 years. Because I am 36 years old. I remember more or less what society was like 20 years ago. And if 20 years ago we had had a massive trade partner who we then went to war with, I would remember that we were trade partners with them and that we used to be cool and tight. But it doesn't really say what sparked the war. I mean, it was was it the kidnapping of Eric? Was that?
I think that was a part of it. I thought there were territorial disputes, and then invasions. But there were also wars between the different factions within the Earth Fae.
Right.
And so I get what you're saying.
But okay, so they were faction, they were warring 10, 15, 20 years ago, however long ago it was. I think it was 20 years ago when the mantle was first stolen.
And it's been 10 years since the end of the war.
Right. So on top of that, so we've got this war that happened 10 years ago. between the Earth Fae and the Sea Fae, who before that had been trading partners and friends, but it was a knock-on effect of wars between the Earth Fae. But from what we see of the Earth Fae, it seems like they're now in a peaceful period.
Yes, they're unified under her father.
Is it me, or would I prefer the story of the wars?
Oh yeah,
Than what we got here.
yeah, but then it wouldn't have been a romance.
That's
If
true.
if she was just trying to write high fantasy, then definitely this is an instance where the backstory is more interesting than the actual story.
Yeah.
And this would be the final act or something of the book would be
Mhm.
everything that happens in this novel,
Right.
where the son ends up marrying the daughter and then they're friends again, whatever.
Yeah. As far as pacing, there's also what happens in that 10 years because Livia grows from a child to someone on the cusp of adulthood. And Eric is like this grizzled old man. I don't know if it's just the voice. It could be the
I
voice.
think it's the voice because I got the impression he's like mid 20s and every scene is her describing like, yeah, he's a little bit scarred up, but he's you know, he's 180 pounds of twisted steel, sex appeal.
Yeah. I don't. I kept, especially when we talk about his limp and his, how his when he grinned, it pulled at his scars. I just kept picturing Mad Eye Moody from Harry Potter.
Hell yeah.
That's who I thought she was sexing.
Mad Eye
Was
Moody,
Mad Eye
that
fucking Moody
fake eye
with that
busting
fake eye?
out,
Hell yeah,
fucking roping.
busting white ropes all over her sex.
Yes.
So yeah,
And there's all these moments in those scenes where he's just like, you should be sure before.
Yeah.
Because once we do this, you're mine forever.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why ABO fiction is as popular as it is.
ABO?
Alpha, Beta, Omega. What if humans had a natural, irresistible social interdynamic like the way people think wolves are, where there's alphas who are alphas. They're big, they're dominant, they're dominating. And to be clear, alphas are pretty much always male.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly. He is contextually, he's this old, grizzled,
Yeah.
scarred up, powerful wolf.
Mm-hmm.
And most of his actions are
right
designed to shore up his power
right
by proving that he is more violent and more dangerous than the other people around him.
And then betas are naturally submissive.
Beta.
And alphas and betas are drawn to each other. Like
in the one true pairing.
Yes. In fact, this is often a vehicle for making your one true pairing happen if it's like
well, I mean, yeah, if there ever was a story of the OTP.
Yeah. And typically this is expressed in the story through actual like mind-altering irresistible pheromones.
Well, I mean, essentially that's what's happening here.
This is an ABO story without the Omegas, which Omegas are basically regular people who don't have a draw to be a dom or a sub.
Okay.
So yeah, alphas are always male.
Because I mean, it's in his blood, and there is very much a fixation on smell and taste and so on and so forth, where it's this chemical.
Yeah.
I just can't help myself.
Right.
Situation. Horrific.
Yes.
All right. So, is it better than Knight Errant?
No, because Knight Errant actually, no.
I mean, Knight Errant is another novel where it really does get pretty close to the main female character being literally objectified.
Right.
But I don't know if it's as bad as this.
No, this is bad from a lot of angles, but it's got some interesting world building stuff, some interesting story elements, and there are a couple of redeeming characters like Sewell.
Yeah, and I liked the way that she had his speech.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was cute.
Yeah.
And, you know, oh, and I guess we have to discuss the serpent and songbird
Uh-huh.
thing. And she uses that throughout the text as a greeting between the two main characters that mirrors the transition from enemies to lovers.
Yeah, because at some point he stopped calling her Songbird and started calling her Love.
Oh no, he did that right from the get.
Oh yeah, he did. That's right. Yeah.
That was one of the pirate elements.
Yeah. But the way the narrator read it was just so skeevy. Love.
Yeah, well, it's like it's Hack Jarrow. You know, it's very
Yeah.
she was trying to channel the Pirates of the Caribbean
Right.
feel for his character, but
That's why I say this is a book with characteristics of pirates. It has pirates in it, but they're not being pirates.
and they're not swashbuckling.
No.
And I mean, they have cannons. There was that one ship to ship combat scene,
Yeah.
pretty sweet, well written, but the imagery of the bird and the snake, I think that's another thing that people who know more about that particular juxtaposition of symbols would be able to critique.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the author is trying to say one thing with it, but I think it sort of betrays
Yeah.
the truth of what she's doing here in the narrative. So worse than Knight Errant, it surpasses cop fantasy, which is a thing that we do not like on the staff in Trenchcoat. But this is worse.
Yeah. It's just Knight Errant felt shorter too.
Well, this was longer.
Yeah.
Literally.
Oh, yeah, this was like a 400-page book, wasn't it? Yeah. So yeah, I think that definitely is a tick in Knight Errant's favor was that it was shorter.
Okay. Well, anything we missed? Any final comments?
No, I think that this is definitely a book that had an excess of bad while not having an excess absence of good, which I think makes it excellent for shows like this. Not necessarily a good book or something worth reading, but it's excellent for shows like this.
Yes. It was a book that was interesting to think about and interesting to discuss. So next time we will be reading Part-Time Monster Hunter by Nicholas Wood Smith, and that's the first in the Cat Drummond series.
This is the same author who did that the book we did last time, the one about the doctor who wants to be a mercenary.
I don't remember.
Okay, well, the main character of that book was sort of the Saul Goodman to this Cat Drummond series.
Okay.
So that's kind of why I picked it, because we both enjoyed that, but there were definitely issues with the character.
So is this the first time we're returning to an author?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So that'll be interesting.
Yes.
Because it's
I
been a
think so.
while since we recorded the last episode, and so I just don't remember the book.
I don't remember the title of it.
Was it Pure Power?
Yes, that was it.
He wrote that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. But this is a totally distinct story, right? Does it connect to...
Yes.
Oh, it does.
So, like I said, the character in Pure Power is
a side character.
in the Cat Drummond story.
Okay, so the first one we read was the spin-off.
Yes.
And we had complaints, and so we wanted to see what the guy could do for the series that he probably considers to be the more important.
Right.
Like he's gonna unleash his full skill.
Right.
You know, the one we read was like for the fans.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were allowing for, okay, maybe he was just like, I'm gonna throw in some stuff for my guys.
Fan service. And that
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
which wasn't able to hit for us. So we wanted to, it was good enough that we wanted to give the author another,
Exactly.
I mean,
Yep.
yeah, we wanted to give him another chance, as it were, to see if we enjoyed their writing style.
Yeah.
So that'll be cool. I'll look forward to that. And so if you are a fan of vaguely Christo-fascist, you know, stories about abuse and rape where the abused person falls in love with the abuser, and then they make it into some bullshit about the one true pairing with vague, chemtrails of, trad wife archetype, then Everking might be for you.
Yeah. And if you know of another actual pirate fantasy, romance or not, hit us up.
Yeah, I want an actual wizards with fireballs and dragons, but straight up pirates, like swashbuckling.
Yeah.
They fly the Jolly Roger. They're actually breaking the law. They're not. It's not a Navy story.
Yeah, it's not the king running around on the ship doing whatever he pleases.
Right. All right. Well, then, having said all of that, again, part-time monster hunter for next time, and yeah, I think that's going to do it for us. As always, I'm Raymond McDowell for Pope Jupiter. We will see you in the next episode.
Ahoy, mateys!
Yarr! Oyster sailors, we're off to the next adventure. Hey, thanks for listening. You can follow us on Twitter at Staff Trenchcoat. Look for us on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to shoot us an email at staffandtrenchcoat@gmail.com if you have a book recommendation, and we hope to see you in the next episode.